Army recruit what they really want? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I'm going to show you an important secret about how the U.S. military positions itself to win wars. And I'm going to explain how this important linchpin might snap before we ever get around to invoking the draft. And finally, I'll show how breaking this rule may destroy much of what the military has achieved over the past 5 decades. This all comes down to a major point that the Department of Defense euphemistically calls quality. Department of Defense Instruction 1145.01 lays out rules for the qualitative distribution of military manpower, and it sets out definitions for what's called the Armed Forces Qualification Test, the AFQT. Okay, when you are taking the ASVAB, there are actually a whole series of subtests, and you're getting graded on each one of those sub-elements. And then what they do is they add up the scores from certain subtests to get a composite score. In fact, there are a whole host of different composite scores, like a crazy number of them. And I won't try to explain all of them, except to say that the AFQT is one of these composite scores. And it's really important because it's how Congress and the Department of Defense define that concept of quality. In fact, the Department of Defense goes so far as to describe categories of these AFQT scores. Category 1 is AFQT scores of 93 to 99. Cat 2 is 65 to the 72nd percentile. Cat 3 is a little weird because it's split into Cat 3A, which is 50 to the 64th percentile, and Cat 3B is the 31st to the 49th percentile. Cat 4 covers folks with AQFT scores of 10 to 30. And Category 5 is everybody below that. Now, there's a couple of things to notice, and the first is that these AQFT scores are based off of percentiles. That is, the same number of people have the same score. So really, your AQFT score, it represents your ranking against the population, not really how you scored on the test. And as a result, the AQFT distribution doesn't have that normal bell curve shape. There are just as many people who score 50 as score 27. Of course, speaking of the score 50, 50 means average. A dude with an AQFT score of 50 has half the American population scoring higher and half scoring lower. But that's the boring part. Let's get back to how this AQFT distribution acts as a secret weapon. Notice that the breakpoints are not evenly spaced. You would think that if the government was going to break 100 rankings into 5 categories, that each category would be 20 points wide. But it's not. Cat 1 includes 7 scores, Cat 5 has 9, Cat 3A has 15, but Cat 3B has 19, so what gives? Well, these categories are designed to conform to congressional guidance. In particular, Title 10 of U.S. Code, Section 520, which gives us a couple of rules. First, Congress sets a limit on the number of Cat 4 enlistees that a service can induct in a fiscal year. Only 4% of all recruits can be at or above the 10th percentile and still below the 31st percentile. Except for a special caveat that I'm going to explain in a second. Second, Congress says that a recruit must be Cat 3B or higher to enlist without a high school diploma. There is a third important point here that has to do with Category 5, the lowest scoring Americans. As far as I can tell, Congress doesn't mention them, but DoD does have a rule. And that rule specifically states that Cat 5 are not eligible for enlistment at all. And all of this brings us to that secret power of the military, and its potential Achilles heel. Do you see what the military is doing? They recruit from the top 3/4 of the AFQT distribution. And as much as they say they want to represent the American population, they specifically do not want people with low vocational aptitude. And that's the secret. The U.S. military is composed of people with above average reading and writing and math skills. People who can learn new things faster. But therein lies a problem. The entire U.S. military strategy, from the weapons we buy to the tactics we employ to our leadership doctrine, it all relies on the assumption of above average cognitive ability. So what happens if a service can't recruit sufficient numbers of service members for their organization? Well, first of all, it can happen, and it has happened before with disastrous consequences. Congress gives the Secretary of Defense the authority to increase the percentage of Cat 4 inductees from 4% all the way up to 20%. And all the SecDef has to do is notify Congress and sit through the grilling that they're going to put him through the next time he testifies. Secondly, the last time this was heavily used was during Vietnam. It was McNamara's so-called Project 100,000, and it was used for a very specific reason. McNamara was trying to avoid the politically unsavory option of mobilizing the National Guard and eliminating the exemption for people who were in college. You see where I'm going with this? I mean, what is a politically unsavory military decision today? The draft. And what is the get-out-of-jail-free card for the politicians? Cat 4s. And how many Cat 4s is the Army inducting in 2024? Well, I don't know. Those numbers used to be like a matter of public record, but over the last couple of years, the Department of Defense office that used to report them, well, they've seemed to stop making them too public. I don't know, maybe I'm losing my touch finding this kind of stuff. But I do know that the Army has been proudly promoting initiatives to train would-be Cat 4s to score higher AQFT scores. But so what? I mean, what could this possibly mean for you? Well, number one, remember that one of the ways to detect trouble is to listen for the distant sounds of screaming. You probably hear a lot of noise about the draft, but that is not the thing to be watching for. Watch for Cat 4 waivers. Number two, I guarantee that if the number of Cat 4s goes up, that the Department of Defense is going to attempt to do that as quietly as possible. And they're going to put as much positive spin on it as necessary. You might feel the effects of this shift in your unit long before you realize that it's happening. Next, do not be surprised if your senior and mid-grade leadership is kind of slow to adapt to this changing demographic. In fact, they might be completely unable to imagine how to deal with the change. I don't really know what the future holds, and nobody does, but if history is any guide, today's soldiers are always going to be faced with unexpected challenges and changes. We need you to be as alert and adaptable as possible. And if you want to see just how unpredictable military life can be from year to year, watch this video on what I call military generations.